Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The No Show. My name is Hussein Ayed, I'm your host, and today I am joined by a remarkable professor who's doing some amazing things, particularly for anyone that's interested in economics and how we perceive the world in an economic light. And sort of she's looking at how we can sort of steer away from the traditional thinking, particularly in Europe. So today, my guest is Professor Brigitte Granville. She is a professor of international economics at Queen Mary University of London. So thank you so much, Brigitte, for joining me.
Thank you.
It's a very interesting discussion that we've just had before we started recording, in that we find ourselves today in a sort of a society where we're essentially told how to think and what to think. In particular, when we discuss issues like, for example, the Eurozone, which has been incredibly divisive over the past 4 years in the UK. So what is the main problem from your eyes?
Well, the first problem is that the Eurozone was never an economic project. Yeah, I mean, in the various papers I have written and in the book, what I show is that most of the economic profession, at least in the US, has always been opposed to the notion that in continental Europe, there could be a single currency. And that for different reasons. It's because the main support for having a common currency is that you have, for instance, in the US, there is a common currency, yeah? But you have the same political system. In continental Europe, the project was essentially to try to have one currency for countries that have different languages, different culture, yeah? And what does that mean to have one currency? That means essentially that you cannot anymore use your exchange rate as a kind of safety valves. Any country, when they have some problem, really, they always can devalue or they can print a bit of money with their central bank. And suddenly, central bank disappears. They didn't have this possibility to use the central bank. And instead, they had the common central bank. They still all those countries kept independence of their fiscal policy, but they had the same interest rate. And the only tools they could use in order to have the necessary, to achieve the necessary convergence between those countries was to try to have this competitiveness in their labor market. Yeah? But if you don't have the exchange rate, what do? You can only decrease wages, unfortunately, or fortunately, most of the time it's not really easy. And so what do? You have unemployment and you lay off a lot of people. And you had now, and all those signals when this idea of the Eurozone came in 1992, and between 1992 and 1999, when it was introduced, everybody warned those politicians, saying, you don't fit the criteria of what Mandel, in his article in 1961, said were necessary in order to have a monetary union, that is free mobility of labor. Yeah. Mm-hmm. At the time, they started to have free mobility of capital, but not of labor. And we still don't have that. And we don't have that for various reasons, because people are really attached to where they live, to where they were born. People have different language. They like their tradition. Yeah.
It's very interesting because you point to this sort of currency being essentially used as this common link between all these completely different countries when
Yeah.
And it's funny you compare it to the US, where the US has, you know, a legal system that's common. It has you know, like a currency, it has traditions, it has values, it has all these sort of practices. And so in that case, what motivated people to join the Eurozone? What was the incentive?
Okay, so Eurozone was essentially, is what again I explained in the book, was essentially decided by, it was after the Second World War, yeah, and it's a long story, but there was the French and all that. They were pressured by the Americans to create to make sure that Germany was going to revive economically. Yeah, the French would have been very happy if that hadn't happened, but the US said, well, you couldn't have the Plan Marshall unless you find a way to cooperate with Germany. And so in 1951, there was a first agreement that was just some industries that were linked together, and that was okay. 57, you had the Treaty of Rome, and that was okay too. It was just the establishment of the single market. There was only 6 countries. But already at the time, some French people, some French economists, some French policymakers were thinking, you can't have really Europe without having a common currency. And their idea was basically, they start to realize that they were not, the empire was over, the colonial time was over. They were not as powerful as they used to be. Yeah. And so, we are running out of time.
No, carry on. I'll just start another one. Don't worry.
Yeah. And so they thought, how can we do it? And in 1992, there was President Mitterrand, François Mitterrand, and he thought, the French were not very good with regard to monetary policies. The inflation tended to be always a bit higher than the German. So and the Germans had a very good monetary policy. Economically, they started to do very well. So President Mitterrand thought, let's join. Let's have a monetary union. Let's have one single currency. And then, at the time, basically what happened in 1989, if you remember, there was a Berlin Wall. Yeah. And when the Germans went to the French to say, are you going to veto the reunification of Germany? The condition, basically, the swap was that they were not going to oppose it as long as the Germans were going to agree on having a single currency. The Germans didn't really want it because they were afraid, the Germans have been traumatized in the 1920s by hyperinflation. And the last thing they wanted was to be in a position where actually they will be, maybe financing, and maybe there will be inflation because other states will not be so prudent as they were. So they were extremely dubious about the entire project.
It's very interesting because it starts off with sort of an idea that it could somehow be beneficial, but then through your work, I mean, most recently looking at sort of the case of Italy, you show that it's not necessarily the case, and Italy would be far better off outside the Eurozone. So tell me about sort of that perspective.
Well, for countries to be together in the same in having the same currency, their economy have to be in sync. Yeah. So things have to converge, their competitiveness have to converge. And if not, if it's not the case, if you have some budget deficits that start to be much higher than the others, at this point, what you expect from the other countries is that they will transfer money to you. Yeah. But the Germans don't really want that. And even if they did, if you look at West Germany and East Germany, where actually since the reunification, there have been a lot of transfer from West Germany to East Germany. East Germany is still not as rich as West Germany, still not doing as well. With regard to Italy, France, Spain, yeah, all those countries, what happened is that they benefited basically from very low interest rate. Yeah, the problem with interest rate, with having a single currency, is that you have one interest rate for everybody. For some countries, it's too high, and for some other countries, it's too low. And what I mean by too low is that you basically motivate those countries to borrow more and more and more. And so therefore, it's wonderful with the voters because that means you don't have to reform. You don't have to have, some very unpopular public policy like saying, okay, we are going to cut this budget. Yeah, you keep borrowing. Unfortunately, if you look at Greece at one point, it may be a shock. And when there is a shock, if you are in these situations where you have high debt, where you have a high budget deficit, and the monetary union is not really there to bail you out, and there is rule that the Germans insisted inside this Eurozone to avoid any kind of exchanging bit, but at the origin, any bailout, the Greeks were completely cooked. Yeah? And with regard to Italy, again, the interest rate was always too low. They borrowed, they were relatively okay with the fiscal policy, but somehow they were not able really, there was always a commission telling them you can do that, you cannot do that. And they were never, they never had the necessary oxygen for them to, they needed to devalue their exchange rate, and they couldn't do that. Because the main problem, of course, inside the Eurozone is that the competitiveness is with Germany, for instance, yeah? But they have the same currency. So what do you do? It's not, devaluing the euro is not a solution. It's a solution with the US, for instance, but not with Germany. You have, and the only way you can do that is by reforming your labor market. Well, some countries find that very difficult because people don't like it. Yeah.
I mean, you sort of paint it in a very, very easy to understand light, and I think one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is how much, the incredible sort of differences there are in each individual country's economy within the Eurozone. And like you mentioned, the case of Greece is, Greece is a severe case where how can you sort of treat Greece in the same way you're treating Germany? And the economy is a completely different.
It's a complete different culture, okay? So the fiscal policy, when the Greek joined in 2001, was not at all adapted to the system. Many people didn't pay taxes, yeah? And you have also a different relation, yeah? In France, there was also other problem as well. So it's very difficult to have one. For instance, if you had a monetary union, let's say with all the surplus countries of the Eurozone, it would make sense. It will be much easier if Germany was tomorrow going to leave and say, okay, we are going to form an union with, with Netherlands or with the countries, that are the kind of, on the budget side, at least very, very sound. Well, maybe it will make sense. Yeah. But it doesn't make, even with France, it doesn't really make sense. Look at what is happening in France now with COVID. They are very happy. They have the excuse. And I'm not saying it is not unfounded, but with the pandemic, the French government is borrowing like mad. And what can the German do? Nothing, because also it's a club that is, both Germany and France keep breaking the rules nonstop, yeah? But nobody can tell them anything, because if you say to the German, suddenly you have to pay fine because your current account is above the norm that was agreed, German would say, okay, we leave. Yeah, maybe they will not, but they will certainly not pay. And the French, if somebody say, who, please do something about your budget deficit, they will say, okay, so what do you want us to do? We are not going to pay. Try to make us pay.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. So the work that you're doing on Italy now, talk to me a bit more about it. So, I mean, I know in the past that you've advised governments on sort of on the Eurozone. You worked on that project. So first of all, let us talk about that project. How did you get involved in that?
That is a very funny story. I think it's it's quite crazy. It's really a long story. I was at a conference in London. At the time, I was working for Chatham House, which is, kind of think tank. And it was a long time ago. It was 1990, 1991, yeah? I was very young. And I was near one of my favorite old prof. And at the time, there were not many women in those kind of conferences. And so I was sitting near him. And there was Jeffrey Sachs, and all those committees started to talk about Poland. At the time, it was not Russia, it was Poland. And I listened, and the colleague really the big committee I was sitting near, just said to me, make sure you shut up, yeah, because you don't want to destroy your career. But it was already too late. I already have raised my hand. And because there was not many people there, so I asked to Jeffrey Sachs something very, very provocative, yeah. And everybody looked at me like I was, a completely mad person. And the professor was telling me, say, yeah, now you did it. You really broke your career. And then I said, oh, okay.
And of course,
and
Jeffrey Sachs is for anyone that doesn't know, Jeffrey Sachs is like a renowned economist.
Yeah. And then, we started to argue a bit with Jeff, and it was the end of the conference. So I knew I better hide, and the only thing I wanted was to disappear. And suddenly, was somebody on my back, and it was Jeff. And he started arguing with me, and we started arguing like hell. We always argue like hell. We really, we are very, very good friends. And now, but we always argue. And and then, it's, how do you dare, blah, blah, blah. And then after I said, well, you have to join me.
Excellent.
So
it pays to be a nuisance.
I don't know. I think it pays, I think you have to let yourself be. I think too many people, think, especially women, I mean, you're too young, but in my generation, if you were a woman, you were either hysteric or an idiot. I mean, every time you open your mouth, you have to be very careful. Well,
it's very interesting because, I mean, to be in that world as a woman in the 90s, like you're talking about 1991, you must have been very bold to take that step.
I was completely bold, yeah. I have always been extremely bold, yeah.
And so you sort of become friends with Jeffrey, and he says he asked you to work with him. So tell me about this project the first project that you worked with Jeffrey on, and what was that like?
The main one was on Russia. We arrived in Russia in 91, Jeff, and there was two presidential scene, and ask basically two advisors, sign a letter for to be advisors. One was Anders Saslund, and the other one was Jeffrey Sachs. Jeff was, at the time, he was at Harvard, and he had a grant from the Ford Foundation. So, and at the time, the person we were working was Yegor Gaida. Everybody in the team, ministers, all the reformers were extremely young. Everybody were in their 30s. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, I think, was 32. Yegor Gaida was about the same age. Boris Fyodorov as well. Everybody was extremely young. And to such an extent that anybody that criticized the reforms that were introduced, you know, I forgot, but they call them the baby, or I mean the pink babies or something like that. But they always try, you know, to emphasize the fact that everybody was so young in the team. And so the work started in November 1991, and it was extraordinary because you know, imagine it was Soviet Union collapse. And you had every day was like introducing a chapter of Eco 101. Yeah, one day it was price liberalization, the other day it was, I don't know, it was trying to make people understand that inflation was not always good for the poor. I mean, it was endless. It was absolutely fascinating.
That's incredible. So what was that? What was that experience like in that you essentially you basically had to recraft an entire economy?
Yeah. But there was an anti-team, yeah. Me, I was just a little pawn with all my friends. I mean, we were, you know, we belonged to a team that was called the Macroeconomic and Financial Unit. And we were working in the Ministry of Finance. And what you have to understand, you know, is that the central bank at the time was led by somebody who was still a Soviet. So he was really opposed to us. There was still a lot of communists. And so the story we had were incredible, you know. Sometimes we will arrive in the office and that close the office. Some other days, you know, they will have taken our computer. I mean, it was just, it was like, you know, Far West. We never knew one day or another what was going to happen.
But it sounds like it was an incredible sort of an eye-opener. And I mean, to be sort of there firsthand when you know, the Soviet Union collapses must have been quite something to watch.
No, it was fantastic. And also, you know, all those people, we are, you know, all the people, we work together, and we basically we were all the time together. And whether it was Russian, American, French, you know, whatever nationality, we are still extremely close because we all went through something quite extraordinary and fascinating.
And I guess the sort of that paves the way for you to sort of then, from that kind of work, then to be very critical with how these trading zones or sort of entities work, economic entities work. And so obviously you have a particular perspective on France, obviously as a French citizen.
I'm also British.
You also are dual citizenship, but I mean, in terms of like looking at the issues in France, where do you think France has gone wrong in terms of its, I guess, economic thinking, in terms of its thinking of governance in general?
I think it's not where it has gone wrong. I have an uncle now, he's 90. Yeah. And I have discovered when I was talking to him about the books that in fact he must have been a philosopher. And the reason I said that is because I was telling him about my book and blah, blah. And then he looked at me and said, he said, the French have always been the best at everything. They were always a genius. Yeah. And he said, look, in 1939, we were the most powerful. We had the best army in the world. And guess what? In 1940, 6 months after that, the Germans were in Paris. What I mean here is that the way, I mean, since the French Revolution, really, the way the French works is why I love England so much. It's because, and I love looking at what's happening and contrast it with what is happening in France, is that the French will start with a model, okay? And they are not, and this model is rigid, and everything has to fit in the model, okay? The statistic, whatever, it has to fit that. is extremely rigid. So they will have a strategy, for instance. Look at the vaccination. So that everybody was working, all the government work on this wonderful strategy of the vaccination. Yeah, they forgot one thing. It's called logistic. Okay, so without logistic, there is no syringe. There is nobody to actually deliver the vaccine. There is no center of vaccination. Yeah, but the plan is fantastic. Now, if you look at the Brits, there is never a model nor a plan. Oh, well, Brexit, okay, we will see how it goes. But somehow, they try one thing, it looks incredibly messy. Okay, that doesn't work. Let's try again. But that's the end, it works.
It's very interesting because I think this is a very economic way of thinking as well, because economists are sort of like famous for, trying to make everything so clean and crisp, and every formula has to make sense. And
well, it's getting even worse, Hussein, right now, because now, if you try to submit a paper, yeah, you can see that some economist has been trained in a certain way, the way they review the paper, okay? Because if the paper is missing for them, some key, some things that really should be there, they are going to kill your paper. Because in your structure, I don't know, your literature review is not, or the methodology is not clearly defined, yeah? But sometimes those things have to be interlinked with a theory, with a literature review. In order, it's like a piece of music. Sometimes things has to be much more fluid than those 1, 2, 3, yeah? And okay, and this rhythm. And sometimes it cannot be 1, 2, 3. It has to be, okay, 1, 2, 3. And then you have to have different rhythm and to allow that. And that is true in every single science or discipline. And the economists tend to, the only thing they thought they made it because the only thing that, okay, now it's true, they take a bit of everything, and that I like about our field is that if we like something in sociology, up, we take it. If we like something in biology, off, we take it. But they have this kind of, it's like, they have this admiration, craziness about mathematics without understanding that, well, I'm sorry, but mathematics is also very creative. The best mathematician, they are the best mathematician because they let their mind also and they try to solve things in a different way.
I think one of the things I discovered looking at economics, obviously having studied economics, but then just having a key, like a really deeper interest in all these ideas, is that I find it like the first thing that struck me is, this concept of being a rational consumer. I'm like, I thought to myself, I'm like, I'm not a rational consumer. I'm an idiot when it comes to consumption. So like, how is everybody perceived to be rational? And I think it sort of speaks to this idea of governance where we think everything.
I think it's not. I think you said it's not even that the problem. We can all start by thinking, because what is economics after all is try to study human exchange. So it can never be precise, yeah? So you can understand that some people want to give some code to start some simplification. And so you are going to put rationality, or you are going to put various concepts in order to formalize and to simplify, and then after to go further. But as long as you use it as a kind of box that you can get out also, that you can say, okay, so in general, you have this, but you can have some outliers, and maybe the outliers actually are not the outliers. Maybe the other side is the outlier. But you have to allow for this constant flexibility. Otherwise, if you think, oh, no, that is not at all, it doesn't fit this concept or this theory, well, invent another. Why don't you invent another if it doesn't fit? Why do you have to stick? Because you want to be published? Well, if your only motivation is to be published, you are in the wrong job. Because for me, what is important is, is to write, is to be able to learn.
I think from the discussion about your book and just your method in general, you strike me as a very rebellious economist. So you don't really want to follow the exact same, like essentially rituals of economics, and you want to do things that are prepared to explain and sort of present a real argument, a counter argument. So, I
it's
mean,
not something I want to do, Hussein. It's because, I read a lot, and I like to understand things. So it's not something I really want to do. It's like this professor, this voice near me saying, don't do that because you break your career. Yeah. But somehow I can't help it. I have to go to understand. I can't help it. It's not something I want to do. I wish I was, it would be so less problem in my life is I was just, doing my stuff, publishing what they asked me to publish, saying what they want me to say. But somehow I can't, he will kill me. So I just go on.
I mean, obviously, one of the things that you say that, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people, like, especially in the Eurozone, would be very angry about is the fact that Italy leaving the Eurozone is actually a very sensible move.
Yeah, no, they got, you can't imagine the kind of argument I had with really top notch anyway, it was not nice, but never mind. It's
No,
necessary.
so let's speak about that. So I mean, what would happen to the Eurozone if Italy does leave? I mean, like, would it just sort of become some kind of Armageddon and everybody would rush to get out?
Yeah, it will be basically finished. I mean, the point, what we are, one thing, because people don't like chaos. So my colleagues, what they want to recommend is that, in fact, the best country to leave will be for Germany first to leave.
Mm-hmm.
The German will never leave because, for various reasons, historical, they don't want to that people think they are the baddies. That is one thing. And economically, the only country that has really, benefited from the euro is really Germany. So they have no much interest in leaving, because if they left, that means that the exchange rate, instead of depreciating like Italy's or the French, like the Spanish or the Greek, of course, will appreciate quite considerably, which means I think it's a good thing because it will give them the necessary stimulant for starting to be innovative again, which they have not been for the last 20 years.
So tell me, your new book is out yet?
It's in March. It's going soon. It's coming soon.
Oh, so it's out in March. So what I'll do is, like, I'll put a link to it onto the video on the episode, so people have access to it. Where can people get hold of you online, or how can people reach out to you?
To find me?
Yeah.
Well, it's the usual things. There is Google. You Google me. There is Wikipedia. There is Twitter. There is Queen Mary.
What's your Twitter handle?
My Twitter, Brie at Twitter.
Send it to me, and it'll be on the episode anyway. Just send it to me, and it'll be on the episode.
I will send it to you.
So, I mean, just before we wrap up, I want you to give one bit of advice to people who are thinking to sort of get into economics or read into economics, try to understand economics. What advice would you give somebody that's at the beginning of their journey?
I think, okay, only do it if you really love it. Yeah, if you absolutely love it, because I don't, I taught many different profiles, whether mathematician or, and what I have found is that some people have the economic intuition and some people don't. And unfortunately, it's not that it's a difficult topic, but for some reason, if you don't have this kind, it's a bit, it's difficult if you don't really feel it. If you are not passionate about it, it's not a field I will go into. I mean, and also, you know, the people, the economic is nicer as that when I entered, but it's still a bit stuffy, a bit, you know, they tend to think sometimes a bit too much of themselves. And so for a young person who is not Ivy League, who doesn't belong to the club, and when I say, you know, Ivy League is mainly the US, it's not easy. It's not an easy path.
So, and I mean, if we were to sort of be specific to like advice to women who want to get into that sort of world, what advice would you give them?
Just to the same, to be themselves and to be really bold, to really go for them. Yeah, because, you know, everybody will try to make them shut up if they have something to say. But to make sure, if they have something to say, to always speak. And I think, you know, I must look very old because I'm sure that now is, I hope that now for young academic is much easier. But I'm not sure things have changed so much.
Excellent. Well, Brigitte, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. And
it was a pleasure. It was such a pleasure for you to listen to me. It's very kind.
I know, honestly, I think you're just a remarkable character yourself, but also your work is amazing. And just a note to the audience, we'll be sort of pursuing ideas of how we can get some of Brigitte's work out there, because I think this is, I mean, if you do take a look at the work itself and the depth to which she's gone into sort of challenging our contemporary ways of thinking about governance and things like that, I think you'll find something very refreshing there that you don't tend to find a lot in economics. And as somebody that reads economics, you know, just for fun, I do think Brigitte's work is worth the read. So please do keep an eye out for the link that we'll provide for the book that's coming, and also just check out the profile on the Queen Mary profile that we'll provide. But again, just once again, thank you so much, Brigitte. I enjoyed speaking to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video, and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone.